There is no doubt in the scientific body of knowledge that we have, with over 5 decades of research, whether it's in the field of neuroscience or cognitive psychology, that there is a huge difference between the brain of the humans in comparison to non-humans. One of the regions where this difference is hugely seen and examined is the prefrontal cortex. That region essentially in humans is a larger region in comparison, let's say, to monkeys. And we also have a lot of research that shows that one of the major functions of the prefrontal cortex is essentially the higher level of cognitive functions, such as decision making, reasoning, planning, distant thinking, language, and so forth. And we know that we differ in behavior and in development over the millions of years that at least we know of, that the human brain has differentiated itself from that of the primates and non-human animal brain, I should say. And so in today's video, we're going to discuss one of the most recent papers that came out that revisits these differences and also some similarities to essentially re-examine the questions that we have as to why the human brain differs so much when it comes to prefrontal cortex and what that it actually means. While based on our observation, we can tell that there is a lot of differences between humans and animals, there are still some similarities when it comes to the prefrontal cortex between animals and especially monkeys, because that is where we have the most scientific body of knowledge between humans and rhesus monkeys. The similarities is, for example, the fact that we are able to create tools, build tools, and use tools. And we have seen over and over again with a lot of scientific research that rhesus monkeys are extremely powerful. They are able to use tools and they show a lot of intellect when it comes to using tools and whatnot. However, there are also a lot of differences, and these differences is, for example, us being able to think very abstractively, thinking in distance, and our working memory in which it works, us remembering things, short-term memory as well. That differs a lot, for example, in this case with monkeys. And that is where we have done extensive research to see how those differences exist, not only behaviorally, but also anatomically. The human prefrontal cortex is one of the key structures that enables us to remember the immediate past and as a result have a more logical decision making, performing very sophisticated social interactions with our environment, and mainly the information that we get from the outside, it enables us to remember those as opposed to just act and react based on the interactions we have with the outside world. And so as a result, the prefrontal cortex becomes extremely important in humans for that matter. This is something that, for example, animals cannot do, at least to the extent that we are able to do. Anatomically, it also appears that the prefrontal cortex is quite complex because it appears to have different layers within that region that appear to perform different tasks, or at least help us perform different tasks. And so these mental representations of different information and data that the prefrontal cortex appear to process enables us as humans to be able to perform all these extremely complex decision making and having a language and having interactions and building societies and very, very complex technologies for that matter. While there appear to be many differences between the human brain and the animal human brain, let's say in this case rhesus monkeys, there are still some similarities. And some of the similarities is on the different layers and the different regions within the regions or the subdivisions of the prefrontal cortex. We do have some similarities between the human brain and the monkey's brain. So that is definitely in place. However, the big difference that we are able to just visually see is the size of the prefrontal cortex. It has been shown that the size of the prefrontal cortex is 29, almost 30% of the human brain, which is huge in comparison to only 17% in these rhesus monkeys. While we might argue that how could the size matter, in this case the size matters because we're talking millions and millions of extra neurons that we humans appear to have in comparison to, for example, these rhesus monkeys. So that appears to be a huge factor in terms of the way in which we have been developing and the very sophisticated cognitive functions that we appear to have in comparison to these monkeys. Aside from just being able to observe behaviorally how we are different from these monkeys, in the lab, scientists have been able to prove that there is a huge difference in terms of humans' working memory capability as well as our planning capabilities. And so during a vigorous type of research between humans and monkeys, we now know that working memory, which is one of the fundamental brain processes, information processes that we humans have, appear to be a huge differentiator that differentiates us in comparison to animals. And working memory is the capability that we have to have mental representation of an information that we see, even though that information is gone. Let's say that you hear somebody's phone number and you're able to imagine that number in your mind, hold that number in your mind, and then recall that number even if that number is no longer present in front of you. That is, for example, one of the major functionalities of the working memory. And that is something that we already know that monkeys do not have, at least to the capacity that humans have. One way in which we've been able to prove that the working memory is very different in humans versus animals is something called delayed response. A delayed response is where the activity of the neurons do not diminish, and in fact they still remain active even when the stimuli is gone. Let's say in the example of a phone number or memorizing a phone number, the fact that humans are able to keep that mental representations of those numbers even when they are gone is clearly proven and shown in lab settings where we are clearly able to see that specific neurons and specific regions specific subdivisions of the prefrontal cortex is still maintained and very active even when the stimuli is gone. And that is the huge differentiator between us and, for example, in these rhesus monkeys, because we are able to deal with this so-called delayed response. Our neurons is still active when the stimuli is gone, and that is also how we can tell that our working memory is much more sophisticated than that of monkeys if it's not even the best performance. And so to sum up, over 5 decades of extensive experimental scientific research, we know that the differences in which we are able to conduct very high-performing, sophisticated cognitive functions such as decision-making, language, etc., we can bucketize them into 3 different major components or major categories in comparison to that of rhesus monkeys, for example. One of them is the working memory. While the working memory capacity of humans is still pretty small, the fact that we even have it and the fact that we are able to show that it's one of the pillar cognitive processes that has to do with a lot of our sophisticated cognitive function makes us apart in comparison to the monkeys. Another way in which we differentiate is the way in which we are able to think abstract thoughts. That is also something that our prefrontal cortex enables us to do, which also differentiates the human brain with the non-human brain. And lastly, our ability to link distant data. And that means that even if the data and information and the stimuli is not right in front of us, we're able to make connection between what we're presented with right now and the distant data, a data that is not available to us. And that is also something that these rhesus monkeys, at least to our knowledge until today, are not able to do. While this was a refreshing look into summarizing and categorizing the differences between us and the non-humans or the animal brain, we still have a lot to learn. But this review in particular was extremely exciting because it was able to sort of bring it together all that we already know and all that we are hypothesizing so that it paves the way for future additional research.